Perfection. What price would you pay for it? The blade whispered as it moved, silent as moonlight, deadly as betrayal. It shimmered with luster not entirely born of the forge. Something lived in its metal, something that watched and waited. In Fulgrim's hand, it felt like destiny. But we begin before the blade, before the screaming flesh and golden statues, before the rot in the soul. We begin with beauty, with pride, with a god among men who once walked in radiant step beside his brothers and the emperor himself. He was Fulgrim, the Phoenician, sculpted not merely to lead, but to inspire. Of all the sons of the emperor, none shone so brilliantly, none so resembled their father's vision. To look upon Fulgrim was to understand majesty. His hair felt like spun silver. His armor was a masterpiece in motion, each plate etched with the artistry of 1,000 master craftsmen. And his voice could command silence in a warring city, or tears from a crowd of killers. When he spoke of perfection, others believed they had glimpsed it. But perfection is a lie the soul tells itself again and again until the truth suffocates beneath the weight of desire. On Chemos, the world that bore him, Fulgrim had clawed civilization back from the brink of annihilation. In a world of poisoned skies and silent machines, he had taught humanity to rise again, not just to survive, but to build, to create. The drive for perfection wasn't just in him. It was him, sculptor of his world, redeemer of a dying race. When the Emperor came, Fulgrim bowed not out of submission, but recognition. This was the father he had always imagined, the one worthy of him, the one who could finally answer that terrible yearning inside. When Fulgrim took command of the Emperor's children, they were but a shadow, decimated by a genetic flaw in their gene seed, their numbers a whisper of a legion. Yet he did not mourn. He spoke to them of destiny, of beauty, of a future where they would become living avatars of the Emperor's dream. He gave them purpose, and in return, they gave him worship. They painted their armor in pearlescent whites and imperial purples. They sang hymns before battle. They moved with balletic grace, even in slaughter. They were killers, but elegant ones, artists of war, every blow a stroke of genius, every campaign a canvas of blood. And Fulgrim led them, radiant and resplendent, the ideal made flesh. But what happens when the ideal begins to believe it is greater than the dream? It began with whispers, echoes in the dark. The blade came to him on a Xenos world, buried in a vault not meant for mortal hands. A sword unlike any other, singing in tones only he could hear. They called it the Lair Blade, but it was no weapon of simple alien make. It was a seed, a poison in steel. And Fulgrim, ever the lover of rare beauty, could not resist it. He did not know, not then, that he had taken his first step into shadow. But the sword did. The first change was subtle. A pause too long in admiration of himself. A silence stretched over disobedience. Then came the perfectionism, sharpened into cruelty. The critiques became barbs. The praise conditional. His warriors bled not for the dream, but for Fulgrim's approval. Some failed to earn it, and paid in flesh. When he painted, the colors wept. When he sang, others could hear the tremor in his voice. He demanded more from his artists, his warriors, his gene sons. He tore down what they built to force them to build it again better, higher, closer to something. And always, the sword was in his hand. Always it whispered. Then came Istvan, the moment the mirror cracked. The Phoenician had stood before Ferrus Manus, his brother, his friend, his rival, the Gorgon of the Iron Hands, a creature of iron will and granite truth. And Fulgrim had begged him. "Join us," he had said. "Do not be blind. The Emperor is a tyrant. Horus offers freedom." But Ferrus did not bend. He never bent. And so Fulgrim struck him down. In that moment, the blade screamed in triumph. Fulgrim's hand had not moved of its own will, or so he would claim later. The blade had guided it. Or worse, he had let it. Ferris's head fell, silver eyes wide with disbelief. Blood pooled on the obsidian floor like spilled ink. The brother who had forged blades beside him, who had argued and laughed and warred and sung, was no more, and something inside Fulgrim shattered. But there was no time for mourning, no place for regret, not in the court of the War Master. Horus embraced him, welcomed him to the pantheon of traitors. The fall was complete, or so it seemed. The truth was more insidious. Fulgrim did not fall. Not truly. He split. The blade. Oh, the cursed blade. It was no Xeno's relic. It was a prison for a being that should never have touched this galaxy. A demon of Slaanesh, Prince of Excess, Lord of Agony and Rapture. And it now wore Fulgrim's flesh like a mask. The real Fulgrim screamed from within. His soul was imprisoned, tormented, twisted in reflection of everything he once loved. Every stroke of art he had ever admired became a mockery. Every song a dirge. Every perfection now a trap. And outside, the creature wearing his skin led the Emperor's children into madness. They became monsters. Not suddenly, but with a slow, erotic glide of a silk curtain falling over the gallows. Battle cries became operas. Flesh became canvas. Pain became ecstasy. They hunted sensation, not victory. They sculpted horror and called it beauty. And Fulgrim, what remained of him, watched. Watched as his sons devoured themselves. Watched as the galaxy burned. Watched as perfection twisted into the obscene. Once, he had sought to be the pinnacle of the Emperor's creation. Now, he was its greatest warning. A living lesson. That the pursuit of perfection, unchecked by humility, becomes a road to damnation. And yet, some say Fulgrim escaped. That in a moment of unimaginable clarity, he cast out the demon, if only briefly. That he stood alone in the quiet of his own mind, covered in blood, weeping for all he had lost. For Ferris, for his sons, for himself. But the moment passed, the mirror shattered, and the thing that remained in his place smiled. Tell me, do you think you would have resisted? Do you think beauty cannot betray? Then look again into the mirror and listen for the whisper. To be chosen by a god is to carry a burden forged in fire and polished in blood. The Emperor never wept. That was what they said, that his face was a mask of cold divinity, sculpted by fate and sealed by duty. And yet, when he found Fulgrim, when he took the Phoenician into his arms and looked upon that flawless form, radiant even in the toxic dust of chemos, there was something in the way he touched the boy's shoulder. A pause, a softness, as if he knew, as if he had already seen how it would end. Fulgrim was not just found, he was claimed, a soul bound not by circumstance, but by design. Unlike his brothers, scattered to the void by the madness of the warp, Fulgrim had suffered a quieter exile, not cast into fire like Ongron, not dropped into the mire like Mordorion. Chemos was not a world of endless war or unrelenting beasts. It was a grave, a world whose machines had forgotten their purpose, where survival was eked out from the bones of the past, a dying echo of humanity's greatness, poisoned by its own legacy. And into that silence came Fulgrim. Even as a child, he was not like the rest. Where others scavenged, he created. Where others hid, he stood. He taught the people how to rebuild, how to remember beauty. He crafted sculpture from ruin, poetry from despair. He spoke of excellence, not as a dream, but as a duty. He turned despair into a renaissance. Chemos bloomed beneath his hands. And when the Emperor arrived in fire and thunder, Fulgrim walked to him unafraid, not as a servant, but as a mirror. "You are my son," the Emperor had said, and Fulgrim had smiled, not with pride, but with recognition. He had always known he was meant for more. When Fulgrim was given the Emperor's children, he inherited more than a legion. He inherited a wound. Their genocide had been flawed. A disaster had claimed their numbers, and only a few thousand remained. The 3 legion, once proud, had become a footnote. But Fulgrim saw not a crippled legion. He saw a masterpiece waiting to be sculpted. He stood before his new sons and gave them a single command: rise. And they did, with artistry, with discipline, with relentless refinement. He did not tolerate mediocrity, not because he was cruel, but because he believed they could be more. They were the chosen of the Emperor, and Fulgrim would make them worthy of that title again. Every movement in battle was choreographed, every kill measured. Every warrior expected to master the arts, sculpture, music, philosophy, alongside war. They were not simply warriors. They were exemplars, and Fulgrim was their muse. At first, the other legions mocked them, the grim sons of Perturabo, the bloodcake hounds of Ongron, the stoic ranks of Guilliman. They saw the Emperor's children as soft, as decadent, but Fulgrim made no apology. In battle, they were perfection incarnate. Their blades struck like lightning giving grace. Their formations moved like orchestras. Even their deaths were beautiful. They burned worlds with style. The Great Crusade became their stage, and Fulgrim's legend grew. But pride is a slow venom, and no one is immune. There was a moment so quiet it could have been missed, when it all began to turn, when admiration tilted into obsession. It came on the world of 1349 Theta, a minor campaign against a Xenos race known as the Lair. Their civilization was alien in its art, grotesque in its symmetry, and yet Fulgrim lingered. Where others saw monstrosity, he saw design, purpose, perfection twisted through the lens of another form. He took the blade from their vault, and everything changed. It was not just a weapon, it was a key, and Fulgrim, unknowingly, opened a door that could never be closed. At first, it seemed like inspiration. His senses sharpened, his works transcended. His warriors pushed themselves beyond mortal limits. They began to modify themselves, surgically altering features, refining musculature, remaking their own bodies into canvases of war. The line between art and mutilation blurred. And Fulgrim, he encouraged it, demanded it. He believed he was reaching higher, but he was merely spiraling deeper. His obsession began to spread, infecting his inner circle. Chief among them was Fabius, once a gifted apothecary, now a mad alchemist chasing forbidden truths. Fabius whispered of new flesh, of transcending humanity, of becoming gods. Fulgrim listened, and the whispers grew louder. During the cleansing of the 28th Fleet, the Phoenician ordered a symphony played as orbital bombardments turned cities to fire. He stood on the bridge, eyes closed, letting the music blend with the screams. When his officers questioned the tactic, he smiled and said, "Even death deserves beauty, but even beauty can rot." And behind every praise, there was a hunger, a need to be seen, to be worshipped, not just by his sons, but by the galaxy. Fulgrim's every victory became performance, his every campaign a masterpiece of theater. He began to believe he was not merely a servant of the Emperor, but his equal, and that belief was all the dark gods needed. It was not corruption by brute force, nor temptation through pain. Slaanesh came as a mirror, offering not power, but confirmation. You are already perfect. You are already divine. You have only to embrace what you have always known. The descent was not a fall. It was a dance. And Fulgrim danced willingly. But not all within him agreed. There was still a voice, small, strained, buried deep, that remembered, that loved the Emperor. That grieved the brotherhood he had once shared with Ferrus Manus, with Horus, with Guilliman, that mourned the loss of purity. That voice screamed as Fulgrim's body moved to serve another will, as the Emperor's children devolved into shrieking hedonists, carving symphonies from pain and turning war zones into art galleries of agony. Fulgrim's soul was locked within his own mind, a prisoner behind glass, forced to watch as his dream was murdered in slow motion. What is damnation, if not helplessness? He had once believed he was the Emperor's chosen. Now, he could only hope that his father would never look upon what he had become. And yet, in the darkest pit of his torment, there remained one thought, one ember that refused to die. I was made for more than this. But hope is a cruel thing in the eye of terror, and Slaanesh does not let go of its trophies. There is a moment when the blade does not cut, but offers. That is the moment you are lost. It was not sudden. No bolt of lightning, no choral crescendo, no earth-shattering epiphany. Fulgrim's fall was a caress, not a conquest, a whisper in the dark velvet folds of his mind, a presence unseen but ever near, watching, applauding. The blade, the lair relic, rested in his hand like it had always belonged there. It pulsed softly when he slept, sang lullabies of endless glory. And he listened. He began to see more, hear more, not just with his ears or eyes, but with something deeper, something beneath the flesh. Colors became intoxicants. Music bled emotion. The very essence of sensation turned sharp and honey-sweet, like biting into ambrosia laced with venom. This was not a curse, he told himself. This was clarity. Was it so wrong to want to taste life so fully? Was it not his right as the son of the Emperor? At first, he still believed he served the Imperium, that his pursuit of perfection was the highest loyalty, that the Emperor, cold and veiled in silence, simply did not understand the depth of what Fulgrim sought. He would show him, not through rebellion, through transcendence. But the serpent had already coiled around his heart. It was on the world of Kalanides, for that the last of Fulgrim's restraints finally gave way. The campaign was swift, bloody, but it was what came after that revealed how far the Phoenician had fallen. The surviving population was gathered, not executed, not enslaved, studied. Their screams became instruments, their fear a chorus. Fabius about composed symphonies using nerves and bone, and Fulgrim stood in reverent silence, tears in his eyes. This, he whispered, is the sound of evolution. Those beneath him did not question. The Emperor's children had already begun to mirror their Primarch. Some surgically altered their ears to better hear the music of agony. Others peeled away their skin to better feel the whisper of air. They modified their vocal cords to scream in harmony, to die in tune. They believed this was ascension. And Fulgrim, he called it love. His love for creation, for the dream, for beauty unchained. But deep within his soul, the real Fulgrim beat against the walls of his own prison. Every atrocity carved another scar into his spirit. He howled in silence as his sons became butchers, as his memories of brotherhood, of laughter beside Ferrus and Guilliman, turned to ash. But the demon did not silence him. No, it wanted him awake, because pain was the spice. The entity within the blade fed on Fulgrim's anguish, exalted in it. Every flicker of regret made the pleasure sharper, the corruption sweeter. The demon was no mere parasite. It was an artist, and Fulgrim, a masterpiece in progress. The moment of true possession came like a kiss. It was during a moment of rare quiet, after the Isvan massacre, after Ferrus Manus' head rolled in the black sand. Fulgrim stood alone in the temple they had built atop the shattered remains of a Xeno city. The air was thick with incense and the stench of death. Statues of twisted perfection loomed on every side. carved in imitation of his own face. He stared into a mirror, not a literal one, but into the soul of the blade, into himself. And what he saw was beautiful, too beautiful, a vision of Fulgrim as a god, adored and feared, draped in silk and ichor, his voice able to unmake stars, his every desire fulfilled in exquisite torment, a universe sculpted in his image. He reached out to it, and the mirror reached back. The demon did not seize control. Fulgrim gave it, offered his soul like a lover, trembling and open. The entity smiled through his lips, stretched his form into something more fluid, more divine. That was the true fall, not the moment of murder, but the moment of embrace. And thus, the Phoenix was no more. In his place rose something new, a creature of impossible beauty, radiant and obscene. Fulgrim, reborn as a Daemon Prince of Slaanesh, patron of artists, murderer of joy, seducer of purity, his form twisted and expanded, serpentine and luminous. For arms, each wielding blades that sang, eyes like galaxies, a voice that could turn brother against brother with a whisper. He was no longer Primarch. He was perfection made flesh. The galaxy would never be the same. Yet even then, the human part of him did not fully die. It remained buried deep within, a shard of soul screaming into the void. A man who remembered love. A man who remembered loyalty. A man who still in some fractured, flickering moment missed his father. It is said by those who wandered too close to the Eye of Terror and survived that Fulgrim sometimes speaks to himself in the old tongue, that he paints in silence, crafting sculptures of a face no demon recognizes, a stern face with iron eyes and blunt features. Ferrous, that when no one watches, he weeps molten gold, but then the mask returns, the laughter, the music, the ecstasy, because perfection cannot grieve, perfection cannot falter, and in the service of Slaanesh, to doubt is to die. So Fulgrim dances, he sings, he kills, he whispers to the next soul who dares seek beauty. Come closer, I will show you what it means to be divine. What breaks first, the sword or the hand that wields it? What shatters sooner, the world or the heart that tries to save it? The black sands of Isvan V drank the blood of gods. It began with a lie, as most betrayals do. Horus, war master of the Imperium, summoned the legions under the pretense of crushing rebellion. He spoke of loyalty, of unity, of duty to the Emperor. And the loyal came, iron, fire, and wrath. They came to put down a traitor. They did not know they were walking into their own funeral pyre. 7 legions descended upon Isvan, 3 of them already damned, 4 still innocent. Fulgrim stood among the betrayers, his armor gleaming like a predator's smile, his eyes veiled in silk and madness. He no longer sought to serve the Emperor. He served a greater muse now, himself. The trap was perfect. The first wave struck hard, drawing the defenders out. The second wave followed, supposedly reinforcements. Instead, they turned their guns inward, and the loyalists broke beneath the betrayal. The Iron Hands, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, shattered. Fulgrim moved through it like a dancer. He did not fight, he performed. His blade sang in joy, slicing through brother and bond. He met Ferrous Manus, his oldest rival, his closest equal, on the Obsidian Plain. They did not speak. What was there left to say? Ferrous had once held Fulgrim's blade in his forge, had shaped its edge, sealed its form. It had lain between them like a pact. Now, it divided them forever. Fulgrim struck first. Too fast. Too perfect. Ferrous was strong, relentless, unyielding. But strength is no match for poison when the poison wears your brother's face. When Fulgrim cut him down, the sword screamed. And so did he. There are conflicting accounts of what happened next. Some say Fulgrim wept, that he fell to his knees, cradling the Gorgon's broken body, and begged forgiveness from a god who would not answer. Others say he laughed, that the demon within him took full control, rejoicing in fratricide. The truth lies somewhere in between. What is known is this: Pharis's head was taken. His sons, the Iron Hands, were butchered without mercy, and the traitors turned the world into a furnace of screams. Fulgrim's emperor's children committed acts that even their allies recoiled from: torture as ritual, murder as music. The flesh of the dead was sculpted into cathedrals. Their own warriors begged for new sensations, begged to be unmade and rebuilt. Fabius bulwarked freely now, unchained by morality. He began his experiments in earnest, turning Astartes into things that should not exist. And Fulgrim, he stood above it all, watching, smiling, dead inside, because something had shifted in that moment, something profound. Ferrus Manus had not just been a brother. He had been Fulgrim's anchor, his foil, his mirror, the one who reminded him, by contrast, of what was real, what was mortal, what was human. Without him, the last tether to sanity had frayed. Fulgrim descended deeper into sensation, into madness, into a pursuit of perfection that no longer knew boundaries. The loyalists who survived fled into shadow. Courts vanished into the void, his soul scarred beyond repair. Vulcan was lost, broken, his immortal body shattered again and again. The Iron Hands never truly recovered. They became machines, trying to erase the pain. But Fulgrim had no need to flee, no need to mourn. He had killed his past, and in doing so become eternal. Or so he believed. There's a cost to becoming a god, and Slaanesh, subtle, cruel Slaanesh, would demand it piece by piece. Fulgrim's visions became louder, the demon's presence stronger. The laughter that echoed in his skull no longer sounded entirely unlike his own. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. He became less of a being, more of an experience. His sons no longer saw a father. They saw a god, and gods are not questioned. So they followed him deeper, into atrocity, into oblivion. Every campaign became a stage. Every atrocity, a brushstroke. Planets became theaters of pain. Civilizations were destroyed not because they resisted, but because they were ugly. If a world did not inspire him, it was not worth existing. And yet every now and then, Fulgrim would pause. A sculpture left half-finished, a melody abandoned, a battlefield walked alone. And those who saw him then, those who dared glimpse beneath the mask, claimed he whispered a single name, Ferrus, as if calling to a ghost, as if hoping the dead might still forgive. But forgiveness is a thing for mortals, and Fulgrim was no longer one of them. He had become what he feared, not perfect, just hollow, a shell echoing with stolen laughter, a dancer in an endless song of screams, a god who could no longer remember why he had wanted to ascend at all. The sands of Isfahan hold no answers, only bones and blood, and a silence too loud to endure. Every masterpiece begins with a cut, every evolution with a scream. In the shadow of Fulgrim's fall, a darker alchemy was taking root, not with fire and blade, but with scalpel and needle. In the hidden depths of the Emperor's Children fleet, far from the gleaming stages of war and pageantry, a quiet horror unfolded, one stitch at a time. His name was Fabius, apothecary once, now something else. They called him Bile, a sneer behind his back, a hiss of disgust even among monsters. But he did not flinch, did not care, because Fabius saw what others refused to see. He understood what Fulgrim had become, and he wished to become it too. Not a servant of Slaanesh. No, not like the rest. Fabius had no love for gods. He hated them, but he adored what they allowed. The freedom, the abandonment of limits, the sacred lies of morality torn away like old skin. His laboratories were sanctuaries of screams. There, the gene seed of Astartes was dissected with reverence, muscles flayed, nerves rewired, glands re-engineered. The Emperor's perfect soldiers made more perfect, more sensitive, more responsive, more dependent. He twisted biology like a poet twisting truth, until it sang. And Fulgrim allowed it. No, he encouraged it. Fabius had become the architect of his legion's new form. Under his guidance, the Emperor's children began to change. Not just mentally, physically. Some fused musical instruments into their own flesh. Harps for ribs. Larynxes tuned to specific frequencies of suffering. Eyes replaced with multi-spectrum gems to see beauty in entropy. Others split their own nerves to feel sensation from 100 pain nodes at once. Some begged for amputation, for reconfiguration, for transcendence. Fabius gave it freely, because he saw the truth that Fulgrim had once whispered him alone. The flesh is a canvas, the gene seed merely a palette. He began to create new Astartes. Creatures not born of the Emperor's hand, but of his own design. Aberrations of purpose, engineered for sensation, for horror, for beauty and war. They were faster, hungrier, madder. They had no names, only shrieks. And Fulgrim applauded. To the Phoenician, these new creations were divine choir boys. Their agony was his music, their forms his sculpture. Their very existence confirmed what he now believed with every atom of his soul. The Emperor had erred in restraint. The pursuit of perfection could not be bound by the chains of morality. Fulgrim became obsessed with Fabius' work. At times, he would ascend into the labs and simply watch. For hours, days, motionless, silent, his 4 arms folded in serpentine grace, his demonic face unreadable, until he wept, sometimes golden tears, sometimes blood. Some said it was sorrow, that the last fragments of Fulgrim's soul saw what his legion had become and mourned. Others claimed it was ecstasy. Fabius never asked. He didn't care, because he, too, was changing. The apothecary had once believed himself immune to corruption, that his work was scientific, clean, beyond the filth of the warp. But perfection is a deeper madness than any demonic touch, and the pursuit of it a quieter damnation. Over time, Fabius began to hear the music, not from outside but within, the clicking of bone, the rasp of breath, the weeping of subjects. They were instruments now. He could not hear them. He began to hum along. And somewhere in the heart of his sanctuary, he built something in secret, a child of sorts, not of womb or father, but of will, a prototype of a new breed, a Primarch reborn, not Fulgrim, not a clone, something else, something improved. It did not live long. Fulgrim found it and destroyed it, not with rage, but jealousy, because even in his madness, Fulgrim knew there could only be one Phoenician, one embodiment of divine excess, and he would not share his throne, not even with his reflection. Fabius lived, but the message was clear: create, shape, mutate, but never rival. He returned his work, bitter but driven, more detached than ever, more precise. He no longer sought to serve Fulgrim. He served only the process, the act of becoming, of reshaping humanity into something no longer recognizable. He began to harvest other legions, traitor and loyalist alike, Raven Guard gene seed for stealth, Iron Hands remnants for endurance, even the blood of fallen custodes, when possible, mixed like pigment. Nothing was sacred, nothing was forbidden, and in time, Fabius would become more than a monster. He would become a legend, but Fulgrim Fulgrim became a ghost, a god rarely seen, his form growing more fluid, more dreamlike. He ceased to command directly, no longer led campaigns. He would appear at the height of a slaughter, dancing to the air like a hallucination, touch a dying loyalist on the cheek and whisper, "Isn't it beautiful?" Then vanish. The Emperor's children no longer needed orders. They needed audiences. Their ships became opera houses. Their war zones, stages. The line between battle and ritual vanished. Every massacre was a premiere. Every battle, a performance. And through it all, Fabius kept building. Not for glory. Not for Slaanesh. But because he could. He once whispered to a dying Raven Guard captain, strapped to the table, bones exposed. The Emperor wanted a future. I merely gave it teeth. And as the captain screamed, Fabius smiled, not with pleasure, but with pride, because like Fulgrim, he had realized the final truth. Perfection is not a destination. It is a wound you never stop picking. And the Emperor's children were still bleeding. How many times can a man die before he forgets he was ever alive? There are no clocks in the warp. No days. No hours. Only sensation. Echo. Memory twisted until it devours itself. Fulgrim, as a machine voice may say, no longer walked. He flowed. A demonic thing of impossible grace, limbs unfurling like silk in a hurricane. His face, once the ideal human beauty, now flickered between agony and ecstasy. Truth and delusion. He was not man, not Astartes, not even Primarch. He was becoming. After Istvan, after Ferus. Ferus, if the voice stumbles, there were no more limits. Fulgrim no longer served the War Master. Horus had played his role, a necessary fire to burn away the old. But Fulgrim transcended purpose. His war was not for a throne. It was for meaning. He disappeared for a time. Even his sons whispered of it. The Phoenician had retreated into the warp, into a realm of mirrors and pain, where sensation bled into thought and thought into form. Some say he died there, slain in mind, if not in body. Others claim he tore himself apart in ecstasy, and was rebuilt by the laughter of Slaanesh itself. Both are true. He emerged changed, no longer tethered to flesh. His body now a canvas that could shift and writhe, adapting to mood, to whim, to pain. For arms, each bearing a weapon from myth, a saber that drank memories, a claw that split time, a blade of song, and a fourth that changed shape depending on who watched it. His wings shimmered like broken stained glass. His voice could command worship or madness. And when he spoke, the universe trembled. "I am not your son," he said once, to a dying word-bearer. "I am the song your gods have forgotten to sing." He led his children into the eye of terror, into realms where language dies and color tastes like music. Planets there do not orbit. They pulse. Time folds. And Fulgrim laughed through it all, radiant with purpose. The Emperor's children, what a name, now soaked in irony, followed. They were no longer legionaries. They were apostles of excess. And every gift he gave them made them less like men and more like stories told by madmen. There were those who begged for more than war, for transformation, for fusion with their god. Fulgrim obliged. He created the Lyric Host, an inner circle of post-human demigods. They no longer fought with weapons, but with art. One wielded a harp of flayed sinew, her screams reshaped into psychic shockwaves. Another was covered in mirrored skin, reflecting not your face, but your sins. A third moved only when unobserved, existing in the blind spot of all minds. And Fulgrim adored them. They were his children, now, not the Emperor's. His. But even in his madness, he remembered. Not always, but enough. A name would echo through his thoughts like a hammer on glass. Ferrus. Ferrus. Sometimes, Fulgrim would sculpt him from bone, from ash, from the shredded remains of loyalists torn apart in battle. Always the face was wrong. Too soft, too cold, too real. He would scream, shatter the sculpture, begin again. Those closest to him began to fear these episodes, but none dared speak. Even Fabius, who had once stood as near equal, now kept his distance. He had his laboratories, his clones, his ambitions, but Fulgrim had tasted the warp, the real warp. Not the gods, not the demons, not the powers that barter like drunk titans. No, the truth beneath it, that there is no soul, no sender, only hunger dressed as beauty. And Fulgrim had embraced it. He began to preach, not in words, but in experiences. He would arrive on demon worlds unannounced, his presence driving lesser minds to suicide. He would pluck champions from chaos, test their worth in duels that had no victor. Only survivors broken in spirit, remade in image. And those who pleased him, he gifted them perfection. And those who failed, he transformed them into art. Some still whisper the theater's screams, built into the living crust of a demon planet. There, Fulgrim crafted a symphony of eternal agony, a looping performance of 1,000 Astartes, their bodies reshaped into instruments. They sang without end, each note a plea for death. He would sit in silence for hours, head bowed, eyes closed, utterly at peace. Because he believed. He believed in what he had become. And yet, still, a dream persisted. A single drop of mortal thought in the ocean of his corruption. What if I had said no? He would never answer it, but he could not silence it. He tried. He fought himself once. In the mirror realm, a psychic duel. The demon that wore his skin versus the man he had once been. The battle lasted seconds. And forever. In the end, Fulgrim stood alone, staring into the broken reflection of himself. Both victor and victim. He whispered, I loved him. Ferrus, I loved him. And I killed him because he wouldn't change. No one heard. No one remembered. Except perhaps the demon. Because the demon wore his love like a mask. And Fulgrim danced again. A god of silken razors. Perfect. Alone. Forever. Some ghosts haunt halls. Others haunt the soul. The eye of terror holds no mercy. No silence. Yet in the deep, cursed reaches where Fulgrim reigns, there is one name that still pierces a din. Not screamed in rage. Not wailed in sorrow. Whispered. Ferrus. Ferrus. His death was meant to be an ending. A punctuation mark of betrayal. The severing of a bond that had once defined Fulgrim's last threads of humanity. But the truth was crueler. Ferrus Manus had become Fulgrim's shadow, not in form, in absence. It began with statues, carved in flesh, cast in metal, sculpted in bone. Again and again, Fulgrim crafted his brother, always beginning with the face, always ending in fury. The brow was never stern enough, the jaw too soft. The eyes, those iron eyes, never judged him quite right, and so he destroyed them. He screamed as he shattered their forms, clawed his own face, rent silk with Talon. The demon within him did not understand. It delighted in sensation, in performance, but it did not grieve. It could not comprehend the wound left behind, because Fulgrim, in his deepest recess, had not meant to kill Ferrus. Not truly. He had meant to save him, to show him, to pull him into the light he believed he had found. But Ferrus had refused, as he always had. Ferrus, the Gorgon, the immovable mountain, the only one who never bowed, never flattered, never fawned. He had challenged Fulgrim at every turn. Their rivalry was never cruel. It was intimate, sculptor and smith, dreamer and realist. Where Fulgrim spoke of divine symmetry, Ferrus spoke of function. Where Fulgrim praised elegance, Ferrus demanded truth. They had completed one another, and now Fulgrim was incomplete. He returned again and again to the moment, the final words, the strike, the silence that followed, the shame. Even now, the Daemon Prince of Slaanesh, arch-hedonist of the warp, sculptor's screams, could not escape that silence, and so he sought to fill it. He hunted the gene sons of Ferrus across the stars, not out of vengeance, but longing. Each iron hand he captured, he dissected slowly, searching for fragments of his brother in their marrow. He would speak to them gently, like an old friend returning home. Do you remember him? What did he say to you? Did he ever mention me? When they defied him, he smiled, because that defiance was familiar, and then he would break them. Not just the body, but the identity. He would strip them until they screamed they were not Ferrus, that they had never been him, could never be, and Fulgrim would weep. No, he'd whisper, you're not. None of you are. He tried other methods. He commanded Fabius from Machine's rhythm, to recreate Ferrus, not a clone, a soul. But even Fabius, for all his horror and brilliance, failed. The result was a hollow echo, without judgment, without will. Fulgrim tore it apart with his bare hands. He began hallucinating. In mirrored halls of warp crystal, Ferrus appeared to him, not as a corpse, but as he was, stern, unyielding, standing amid the carnage Fulgrim called art. You become a lie, I become free. You become a parody. I become myself. You were better than this. That last one always broke him. He would lash out, shatter mirrors, slaughter entire cults on his ships. Fabius noted that each time this occurred, Fulgrim's form changed, became less stable, as if the demon and the man inside were at war again, as if regret made the gods sick. But Slaanesh, Slaanesh adored it, because to the Prince of Excess, what is sorrow if not the most exquisite sensation? And Fulgrim's sorrow was eternal. One day, in the eye, he ordered silence, a full day, no music, no screams, no ecstasy. His followers obeyed, though in agony. Fulgrim sat upon a throne of fused bone, head bowed. Around him, the statues loomed. Each was Ferrus. Dozens of them, one made of rusted chain, one of polished obsidian, one of whispering light. He stood slowly, walked to each one, touched them with tenderness. Then he spoke, not to his sons, not to his demon, to Ferrus. I tried to make you see, to make you understand. I thought if you saw what I had seen, you would come with me, but you didn't. You couldn't. So I killed you, and I've been killing you ever since. He fell to his knees and laughed, a horrible choke sound, like weeping wearing a smile. The demon took over then. The statues were destroyed again, and the screams resumed. But some of his sons remembered. They whispered to one another the moment the god cried, and they began to ask themselves, was he ever a god at all? Or just a broken man, chasing his brother through time, through memory, through the hell he built to escape himself? Ferrus had died only once, but Fulgrim was still dying. He who forgets what he was dies twice, and the second death is quieter, deep in the eye of terror, where stars are lies and time walks backward. Fulgrim sits upon his throne. It is not carved of stone or forged in metal. It is grown, living, breathing. The throne pulses like a heart, stitched from the sinews of forgotten kings, draped in velvet torn from saints. Around him, a court of howling princes kneels, twisted remnants of a once noble legion. They call him the Phoenician, the perfect one, the serpent that sang. But they do not call him Fulgrim. No one does. That name is buried beneath centuries of silk and sin, beneath the echoes of a soul that no longer dares to speak aloud. Fulgrim was a man, and a man is what the god now fears. He dreams, sometimes not the dreams of mortals. There are no stars in these visions, no voices, only a face, a memory, a moment before the fall. A man standing over an anvil. His hair is short, his armor dark, his eyes iron, unmoving. Ferrus. That name returns again and again. It haunts the silence between the screams. Fulgrim rises from his throne, robes whispering behind him like dying breaths. He moves through halls of flesh and gold, where walls weep honeyed blood and statues of screaming angels arch overhead. He enters a hidden room, one none of his sons are allowed to see. Here, there is no horror, no torment, no debauchery, only a canvas, a chisel, a statue, half finished. It is Ferrus again. It is always Ferrus, but never right. He touches the cheek. Cold stone. Too smooth. You never forgave me, he murmurs. You never understood. You never saw what I saw. His claws tremble, not from rage, but from memory, because for all his demonic glory, for all his mastery of sensation, he remembers what it meant to be loved, not worshipped, not adored, loved, seen, opposed, balanced. Ferrus was his anchor, his mirror, the weight that kept him from drifting too close to the sun. And when he killed him, Fulgrim became hollow. The demon within shifts. It hates this weakness. It whispers louder now, demanding a new conquest, a fresh massacre, another shrine of weeping flesh. But Fulgrim does not move. He sits. He stares. He is remembering. And the demon knows. This man, the scrap of humanity still alive inside the god, is poison. The divine cannot bear doubt. And Fulgrim doubts everything. That is why the demon begins to pull away. Slowly, with hunger, with calculation. Slaanesh watches, waiting, measuring, because even gods must be useful. And Fulgrim has begun to resist. In one final act of clarity, Fulgrim lifts the chisel. He carves, gently, reverently. Each stroke brings Ferrus closer. The brow hardens, the mouth tightens, the jaw sets. When he steps back, it is nearly him. Nearly, but not, because nothing is. And Fulgrim knows it. He stares, eyes glistening, then turns and walks away. The statue remains, alone, silent, as the demon rises behind him, not in fury, not in love, but in replacement, because Fulgrim, true Fulgrim, is dying, not with fire, not with screams, but with every step he takes toward the man he used to be. And the eye of terror does not forgive those who remember. It forgets them, buries them, and builds gods atop their bones.